Today on The State of Us, the failures of globalization shatter long-held beliefs. What's next for the New World Order? When the world's business and political leaders gathered in 2018, according to the New York Times, at the annual Economic Forum in Davos, the mood was jubilant. Growth in every major country was on an upswing. The global economy, declared the then managing director of the International Monetary Fund, is, quote, in a very sweet spot. 5 years later, in 2023, the outlook has decidedly soured. Nearly all economic forces that powered progress and prosperity over the last 3 decades are fading, the World Bank warned in a recent analysis. The result could be a lost decade in the making, not just for some countries or regions, as has occurred in the past, but for the whole world. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined today by the one and only, your friendly redneck liberal and the senior resident historian here at True Chat, and the king of labels, Mr. Lance Jackson.
Stuff happens.
Stuff happens.
That's everybody needs to get a shirt. Stuff happens.
Stuff happens.
Best laid plans, just you can count on something for so long and you know it's going to mess up. Study the economic history of the world. We go through good times and bad times. We've had such a long run of good times. There aren't a whole lot of us around who remember the bad times. Is that fair? You're giving me this weird look, Justin. You're not listening to me. You're reading or something. But isn't that the case? I mean, is this really any different than 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago? Well, I don't know about that. So it's different for me. So now I'm scared of it.
Well, we've grown up, we being many of us alive today, right, in the era of globalization where an interconnected world is common, but for most of human history, that's not the way the world operated. I think the discrepancy, and this is why people don't know what's going to happen, is in the past, before globalization, we also didn't have nearly this many people or an economy this advanced, and most people were working to find food every day, not working for organizations that don't have anything to do with the production of their sustenance.
So we're going to go back to the basics.
Well, and that
we're going to get rid of all those people that don't do anything, and we're all going to have to start looking for food again.
I don't know that we can do that and maintain the population that we have.
Well, that would be a good thing, right? We know that overpopulation.
If you're not one of the people that's getting nixed in the equation, I suppose it's a good thing. Who gets to decide who gets nixed? Who deserves to get nixed? What's fair?
Doesn't matter. Wouldn't it be better if there's fewer of us? Or what if we get a global war going? Great, right? Because then it cuts down on the human population and the earth can be better.
The article's subheading was War and Pandemic Highlight Shortcomings of the Free Market Consensus, the economic conventions that policymakers had relied on since the Berlin Wall fell more than 30 years ago, which is the unfailing super majority of open markets, liberalized trade, and maximum efficiency, look to be running off the rails. Obviously, COVID tested this and then further tested by the notion of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And it's got a lot of people thinking about what is the economic outlook. Well, EY concluded in its 2023 geostrategic outlook, the trends behind the shift away from ever-increasing globalization, quote, were accelerated by COVID-19 and they have been supercharged by the war in Ukraine. So in other words, right, we have a pandemic, which causes us to question, or not question, but see how vulnerable a global interconnected system is, right? All these things that used to be, most of what America consumed was produced in America, right? And a lot of what most countries consumed was produced in their countries prior to globalization, pretty much all of it. Now that's changed. And so much of what we rely on for day-to-day life is not made here, is not produced here. It has to be brought in. So when things shut down the process of transportation or greatly derail it, all of a sudden, all these things that we're used to having, we don't have or can't have access to quickly. And then you have a war that happens as well. And you have all these interests from American business that were intertwined in Russia saying, well, gee, I don't know that we want to be involved in supporting a country that's going to invade another democracy. You could even throw China into that mix, right? And say that with some of the recent backlash in America towards Chinese-owned social media companies and even telecommunication companies, the questions about, security. Do we feel comfortable allowing certain American companies to operate in China if they're sensitive to our interests as a nation? It did work. I mean, the article points this out. It worked for a while, right? I mean, the favored economic roadmap helped produce fabulous wealth, lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and spur wondrous technological advances. But there were stunning failures as well. Globalization has hastened climate change and deepened inequalities. In the United States and other advanced economies, many industrial jobs were exported to lower-wage countries, removing a springboard to the middle class. Companies embarked on a worldwide scavenger hunt for low-wage workers regardless of worker protections, environmental impact, or democratic rights. They found many of them in places like Mexico, Vietnam, and China. Television, t-shirts, and tacos were cheaper than ever, but many essentials like healthcare, housing, and higher education were increasingly out of reach.
And you're going to blame all that on globalization?
Well, I'm not. I'm just reading from the article.
So what's the answer? I mean, right? We're going to go to closing our borders and making everything ourselves and just taking care of ourselves. Oh, wait a minute. We did that 100 years ago, and it led to World War II when democracy was threatened by the outside. I mean, yes, any system, right, is going to have good and bads. It's going to have starts and stops, and it's going to have things that you're going to have to work on. Okay. COVID came out of nowhere, or Wuhan, however you want to look at it, but it caused major difficulties. Okay. Does that mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do you get rid of something that has worked for a long time to help a lot of people just because an outside source came in for 3 years now and upset the apple cart? Or do you get back, if the horse throws you, do you get back up on it and keep riding it for what it's worth? I mean, what about those people in Vietnam and Mexico that got jobs? Did their life get better?
Yeah, that's, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you because I think on the surface level, it's easy for us all to say yes, right? I mean, they have more money, they have jobs. Maybe they didn't have a job before. Maybe they were working in a field and now they're working in a factory. Their life got better, right? Because
they were ravaging trash cans to find food, and now they make enough money that at least they can put food on their table. I'm not saying they're living a middle-class life.
Right.
But let's go back to the Great Depression here in the United States. There were people starving to death who would have taken those kind of jobs. And I'm not belittling that. I'm just saying the article is casting all of these negative things going on. And maybe for those people, it was a better life than they had before. Is it life equal to what maybe we all think people should have? No. But was it better? Was it better than the life they were living before?
Well, that's part of the discussion, and I think the answer is it depends, because part of what the article talks about is how poor countries have paid the price. Poor nations were pressured by wealthy nations to lift all restrictions on capital moving in and out of their country. The argument was that money, like goods, should flow freely among nations. Allowing governments, businesses, and individuals to borrow from foreign lenders would finance industrial development and key infrastructure. Quote, financial globalization was supposed to usher in an era of robust growth and fiscal stability in the developing world, according to an economist at the University of Massachusetts. But it ended up doing the opposite. Some loans, whether from private lenders or institutions like the World Bank, didn't produce enough returns to pay off debt. Others were poured into speculative schemes, half-baked proposals, vanity projects, or corrupt officials' bank accounts, and debtors remained at the mercy of rising interest rates that swelled the size of the debt payments in a heartbeat. Over the years, this led to reckless lending, asset bubbles, currency fluctuations, and official mismanagement led to boom and bust cycles in Asia, Russia, Latin America, and elsewhere. In Sri Lanka, extravagant projects undertaken by the government, from ports to cricket stadiums, helped drive the country into bankruptcy last year as citizens scavenged for food, and the central bank, in a barter arrangement, paid for Iranian oil with tea leaves.
Is it the system's fault if people abuse the system or if governments abuse the system? Is the system bad if somebody's borrowing money to build sports stadiums when they need to be building roads in their country and infrastructure and better ports? Is that the fault of the system, or is that the fault of bad governments that are asking for money and not using it wisely within their own country?
It's a question we're going to seek to answer. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. In advanced industrial giants like the United States, Britain, and several European countries, political leaders turned out to be unable or unwilling to more broadly reapportion rewards and burdens. Nor were they, according to the New York Times, able to prevent damaging environmental fallout. Transporting goods around the globe increased greenhouse gas emissions, producing for a world of consumers strained natural resources, encouraging overfishing in Southeast Asia and illegal deforestation in Brazil. And cheap production facilities polluted countries where adequate environmental standards didn't exist. It turned out that markets on their own weren't able to automatically distribute gains fairly or spur developing countries to grow or establish democratic institutions. That is sort of where we left off the last segment of this question of, is it the system's fault or the people making the decisions? And the answer, I think, is yes. Yes, both. We believe, or we were being told, right, or the theory went, whatever you want to call it, that if we allow these things to, if we allow this free flow of information and goods across borders and money and people, that it will be self-regulating because businesses will invest in different areas. And then once they invest there, the people will want higher standards, which will spur changes within the government, which will better regulate the businesses, which so on and so forth. The other thing that I think we have to keep in mind is that America, and I know some people may take problem with this, but I want you to hear it out, is exceptional in what we've pulled off. And the other way to say that is we're lucky in what we've pulled off. There were a lot of opportunities along the way for a republic-based government like ours to topple and fail. Most democracies that have lasted a long time in the world are parliamentary systems, not systems like ours. And there were opportunities along the way where it could have easily flipped and gone the other way. So you could use that and say we're exceptional. You could say we're lucky. We got the balance right, whether it was our intuition, smarts, or just dumb luck, whatever you want to call it. Our balance along the way and our development played out that way. The question is, can that be duplicated in other places where the situations are different? And it's not a rhetorical question, because I think part of what the article is highlighting is it works in some places and in other places it hasn't. Like we've talked about how, basically large swaths of Africa have been taken over essentially by Russia and China, and they're, damn near close to enslaving people to get what they want, because they can take advantage of these countries because they're rich and powerful and they can pay off the people that are the leaders, and the people in the countries don't know enough because there's no way to know more of what's going on. So they assume this is all there is. So the question, right, it goes back to that. Trade and shared economic interest prevent war. Well, they've prevented war for quite a while, but obviously they weren't enough to stop Russia from doing something drastic and terrible, Putin.
Well, or terrorism, attacking the world, and the world then going to fight terrorism by the United States fighting terrorism by attacking individual countries. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. That just doesn't seem, I understand the argument. It just doesn't seem fair or right to me with the system, because it has opened up ideas. But what took place in many of these other countries, well, why didn't the United States step in and stop Russia and China from taking over? Why didn't we do what we should have done as a world leader instead of just taking the cream off the top and doing it with it ourselves? And again, do people have the right to determine their own outcome? If they have a fledgling democracy, is it the role of the United States to support it, or do they have to find their own way to make it work? And if they don't, is that the fault of globalization? If a country starts up a democracy and can't keep it going, is that globalization's fault, or is it the people's fault for not continuing that? I mean, we've got the same thing facing us here in the United States. I don't think it's because of globalization, but we're going through a rough time in our democracy right now. So is that because of globalization, or is it because of people not understanding the way our system of government works? Is it with people being in charge of the system who are abusing the system? I mean, what is the answer there? Because United States is not immune to this either. We are at a struggling time for our democracy. I mean, we're talking about, oh, well, will there be a third political party that will come? Will there be a death knell for the Republican Party as we've known it since the 1850s? Is it going to fall away? We're having those discussions. What's going to happen in the 2024 election? You know, are we going to see a third party candidate rise from the ashes? And, you know, what's going to happen to the Democrats and the Republicans and all that? How is that any different than what's going on elsewhere? And is that the cause of globalization?
The challenge once you've globalized, right, or once you're, you know, largely globalized, is that you can't ever really separate anything that takes place
Well,
from
can you go back?
External factors.
Can you go away from it?
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily what the article
You want everybody to become
proposing.
nativist again? Because that's what caused World War II. That's what's caused every great war
and that's
in the history of mankind.
And that's
go
the
back
question,
to your Romans.
And that's the question about, can we do better?
The Romans
You know?
and the Greeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
When they went with globalization, I know you're a big Romans guy, you know, reading about the Roman Empire and the fall of the Roman Empire, and you're in England, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had globalization, and then when they retracted from that, that's when we had all the great upheavals in the world. So is globalization the reason we're having the upheavals, or is it globalization that will stop us from careening out of control like we have in the past when we've pulled back from globalization?
I guess we give probably, it's sort of like when we talk about the president and the economy, right? We give too much credit and too much blame to globalization. We give a lot of credit to it for all these wonderful things that have happened, which, in fairness, it is owed a lot of those things. We also blame it for a lot of awful things that have happened. And in fairness, a lot of those awful things happened because of the way we embraced globalization, you know, which goes back to that, is it a system or a person? Well, people came up with the notion, but did anybody lay out a set of rules at the beginning and say, this is exactly how it's going to go?
Well,
no.
it doesn't matter. AI is going to take over and run it.
Well,
So
it'll fix
okay.
it.
Okay.
Then we won't have to worry about it.
Sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
But, you know, there are also the consequences of it, like, well, okay, we can redistribute this stuff, but we have to get things from point A to point B, right? Well, globalization wasn't designed from the onset to account for what's going to be the environmental impact of doing this. You know, the further we have to transport things, the more energy we have to use to get them from A to B. Even if it's cost effective, that doesn't mean that it's environmentally smart.
When we didn't have globalization, the United States cut down millions and millions of trees and burned them for power and built the railroads.
Yep.
Well, that ruined the environment.
Yes.
So
But the world-
isolationism didn't work
Well,
because, and it increased the population,
it did.
right?
Mhm.
And all of a sudden more foodstuffs were needed, which then caused us to go out and start to conquer the world because we needed more raw materials than what we had the ability to have within our own country. If you're not in charge, somebody else will be.
Mhm.
And people are going to watch out for themselves. And can you change that? Is that an internal drive that's within all of us? Are we just inherently
Selfish.
yeah, take care of ourselves? The Chinese, right? And if I'm trying to take care of myself, that's fine. But Justin, if you're trying to take care of yourself at the loss of me, then that's wrong.
Right.
You're not allowed to do that because that hurts me. But I want to do the same thing. And
Well,
if it
that's
hurts you, I don't care because I'm better off.
We've arrived.
Isn't that just the way the world works?
It's the way it's working right now.
No.
I guess if you say it's working.
Don't you think it's always been that way though?
Well, the thing that's hard is comparing us to where civilization was go even 200 years ago.
When the Spanish conquistadors came over and were looking for gold and they didn't care what they did to the native people and they wiped
They're
out
looking out for themselves.
and they wiped out 90% of them through diseases and war. They were concerned about other people?
No, I mean or not enough, right?
And they did it within the framework of God, gold, and glory.
Mm-hmm.
So my point is, no matter what the system, inherently human beings do these kinds of things.
There will be people that do these things, yes. And often people that don't think they can do them end up being the ones that do them.
And if things are better now for people than they were before, if life expectancy is longer, people are doing a better, living more life than they've ever had before, then hasn't globalization been a success? Yes, bad things happen, but bad things happen in every realm of history, right?
Yeah.
So if we've gained all this technology, we're getting new ways of doing things, people are living longer and healthier, all of these things are good things that have happened. Well, the bad things are going to happen anyway because they always have. So shouldn't we embrace what continues to make some parts of life better?
It's going to depend on who you ask. Because, for the United States, the answer would be, yeah, this overall has worked out pretty well for us. We're still in charge. We still make the decisions. We have by far and away the largest and most powerful military. So, yeah, people get hurt along the way. But if we're looking out for our interests...
Well, it's also stopped global wars. And then
that goes back to our beginning.
There have been skirmishes or fights within. Okay, but again,
right.
we all, God bless them. The old, in the United States, the greatest generation, but around the world, the French and the Germans and all the other people who fought, Chinese, Japanese in World War II, most of them have died off. So are we forgetting what it was like? Are we not going to study history and say, okay, it's only good? No, it's been good for everybody because none of us on the earth right now, very few, less than 1% of us, know what it's like to go through a global war.
Well, that's the next question we want to look at. Is the only answer to go back to nativism or isolationism and avoid globalization altogether, or is there another path? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. China manufactures 80% of the world's solar panels. Taiwan produces 92% of tiny advanced semiconductors. Much of the world's trade and transactions are figured in U.S. dollars. The New York Times article that we're referencing today goes on to explain the new reality is reflected in American policy. The United States, the central architect of the liberalized world order and the World Trade Organization, has turned away from more comprehensive free trade agreements and has repeatedly refused to abide by WTO decisions. Security concerns have led the Biden administration to block Chinese investment in American businesses and limit Chinese access to private data on citizens and to new technologies. And it has embraced Chinese-style industrial policy, offering gargantuan subsidies for electric vehicles, batteries, wind farms, solar panels, and more to secure supply chains and speed the transition to renewable energy. One part they point out is the proliferation of economic exchanges between nations also failed to usher in a promised democratic renaissance. Communist-led China turned out to be the global economic system's biggest beneficiary and perhaps master gamesman, without embracing democratic values. Quote, capitalist tools in socialist hands, the Chinese leader in 1992 famously said when his country was developing into the world's factory floor. The question that we left off with at the end of the last segment is the only other option to go back to isolationism? And then wouldn't that be worse? Because don't we know how that worked out the last time that America tried to practice that and say we don't want any part of what's going on over there in the other part of the world? Well, no, there's probably other options. I'm not sure what they are, but right, hybrid models of globalization, changes to globalization. We don't have a lot to go on in terms of, well, we have nothing to go on other than what we have right now in terms of a world with, 8 billion some people, a continuing growing population, a worsening climate crisis, and questions about, is it really better for everybody? It's better maybe for the majority of people. And are we okay with that? And maybe we are. Maybe that's the measure that matters. More people are better off today than they were before, so this is the best. Or is there something better? I don't think the answer is return to what once was. I think we know enough about what once was to say two things. One, it's not practically sustainable based on the current size and scope of the world to do that. It's just not. It would send backwards some countries into terrible poverty and starvation who didn't have the means to figure out their new place in the world, because there's a lot of countries out there, folks, right? Little tiny countries who really, they do one thing, right? And they rely on big nations to purchase stuff from them.
And is that sad? Yes. Do I believe that those three, and you're throwing the European Union as the fourth, should come to the aid of these poorer countries? Yes. Okay. But how do you do that if you don't have globalization? Well, you have the colonial system. And that's what went on before. And that didn't work well, right? So if everybody is intertwined and their economies are intertwined, then at some point you would think, and again, I know it's supposition here, but you would think that the powers that be would see it's in our own best interest to help these people. And maybe that's what we're entering into. We're entering into this phase. We can't just rape the world for our own country's good, that we have to learn to still take what we need or find a better way other than taking it, but we have to learn to work together, or the outcome is there's going to be nothing for anybody to rule over because we're going to ruin it. So it's a good thing to have globalization because now we can work together to try to fix some of these problems. And maybe that's just the next phase or the next segment of globalization that we're in the midst of working through, that 30 years from now, you and whoever your co-host will be discussing, because I won't be here, but that you'll look back at this time and say, this is when we started to figure out how does China, Russia, get along? How does the United States figure in on that? How do we all work together to lower, and 30 years from now, maybe we did that. Maybe we've accomplished lowering the global climate issue to where all of a sudden the island nations out there in the South Pacific aren't being overrun by salt water, and the huge forest fires are gone. And we fixed all that because of globalization.
I think the question also, though, is are there enough people with enough of the power that can continue to believe in the system? because it goes back to the notion of it worked until, right? For example, somebody like Putin came along and said, I don't care. I don't care about your consequences. I don't care if my people starve, because the notion was that, well, surely, somebody's not going to you're not going to murder your citizens by the, thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. You're not going to do that because, they'd rise up and they'd revolt against you,
and maybe that will still happen.
And maybe it will. But the other thing that, again, just things that we couldn't account for, and nobody should have. I'm not blaming anybody. You couldn't have known certain things that we know today because we didn't have certain technologies, and we wouldn't have them without globalization. They're just things that we have to figure out now moving forward. Like, what do you do when we're reliant on an information system that puts TV in everybody's home? Because that's a huge part of the way that Russia controls its people and prevents them from rising up to change their leadership, when if they really understood what's happening, I don't think the Russian people would still be gung-ho about Putin.
But aren't there segments of Americans who are making that same claim?
Sure.
That you can't trust the media, and so we don't really know what's going on. And that's causing us to overthrow our government. So to counter your point, well, right. So to counter, because that's going on in Russia by Putin, won't that lead the people to try to overthrow the government?
It's one of those that's really hard since we're not experiencing, we don't live in a system, right, where you can only get one newspaper, or that every newspaper you get was already censored by the government, or at least we don't think we do. The difference is a majority of people in Russia support the actions of their government, and not like, 51%, like, 60, 70% on any given day by any independent polling measure. You come up away with people that maybe they don't believe it in their heart of hearts, but they won't say otherwise, publicly. And if you're not even willing to say otherwise in an anonymous poll, are you likely to rise up and, overthrow your government? Probably not. And also, is it as likely that you can overthrow your government? I mean, I think that's the other thing of these people in the United States. Part of the reason that is it kind of scary that there's people that think that way, that you can't trust anything? Yeah, it is. But also, should we really be that scared? I mean, we live in a nation with the most powerful government, the largest the world has ever seen, and more technologically advanced than any of the people sitting in this room have even the slightest idea. I mean, we kind of have a vague notion of what we can do, but do we really comprehend our power? Do we really think that our government would allow our people to overthrow it today? Could we if we wanted to? It's nice to think that we could. There was a time where we could, but the other side of this is once you get to a certain size, can it be done? I mean, it's nice to think that the people in Russia might rise up and overthrow Putin, but unless somebody slips up, right? Unless a big mistake is made by the people who control the system, can you actually topple it?
Okay, so just really quickly, I want to ask you a question then. With everything you've just said, then how do you go about changing globalization? Because you just said all these people are now ruling things and have so much power, we don't have power to change it. So if these people continue to want globalization, it's going to stay. By your own argument, right? I'm not trying to say you painted yourself in a corner, but you painted yourself in a corner because you just said, if we don't have the power of the Russians, if the Chinese, the Indians, all of those people have all these commoners who could rise up against the government, but the governments are so strong that they can put all that down. Then is there any way to change the globalization if the powers that be don't want it changed? See, and I'm still holding out hope that if the masses were to get behind an idea, the governments can't stop us.
I don't, I guess, disagree with the notion that if we could get behind an idea. I think the issue is that the people that have access to control the ideas that we have access to, and I think we're seeing this in our country right now, understand that at the end of the day, it's what we talked about years ago on this show when we talked about the issue with the media, right? If you control the information that people have access to, if you control what they know, then then you have the power, because you don't need the money, you don't need the military, if you have the people, if you have them controlled, the rest of it really doesn't matter, because you can control it all. If you can control what you feed people, then you're going to control how they develop and what they think.
Which is why I fight for free media.
Right.
So that you can have the sharing of ideas, because that's the foundation.
Which is why we have this show.
Of political and economic freedom.
The challenge is that when there are other world powers that possess weapons capable of wiping out millions or tens of millions or billions of people, and they don't abide by those systems, there's a natural, we're experiencing right now, right, between the United States and China, there is a natural collision that's going to occur between those societies because they don't operate by the same.
But it behooves both of them
rules
to figure it out, because if there is a conflict, neither one will be around to rule anything.
Which logically I agree with. I don't see, and that's part of what I think is so hard about the thing that's going on right now with Russia and Ukraine, right, is it seems like the only thing that Ukraine has been for Putin is bad. But I don't know that he cares that it's been bad. And you could say, well, maybe he thought it was going to be different. He thought it would be a good thing. But like, is it really? Great, you take Ukraine. Like, what did that really get you? I guess other than, prestige? But that's not in the interest of your people. It's not in the interest of your economy. It's not, what is that doing for the global world order for Russia to have Ukraine? And that's therein lies, right, the rub of, I don't know. I think with smart leaders or even semi-smart leaders who see the logic that you presented, yes. But what happens when you get people who can control the message, the narrative, who aren't interested in doing what's smart? They're just going to do what they want, and they don't really care what the consequences are.
Well, you know my answer to that. We just take them out.
Right. Well, but we've not been willing to do that a lot lately.
I understand that, but that's, again.
But historically. Just not right now.
I'm a history person, and that's what we've done in the United States since we've been in control.
So why we have the show today?
I'm just saying. Okay, I'm just
there was a reason,
saying,
right? We were trying to.
Well, yeah, we have a mission.
Okay.
And our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And I thought we did that. I don't know. You don't sound so sure, but
no, I liked it.
I thought it was a good show today. And as you listen, hopefully you enjoyed it, made you think a little bit. Tell your family and friends. Tell them if they want to listen to the show themselves, they can find it as a podcast on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us releases new episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays, first thing in the morning as a podcast. Those same episodes are heard on the weekends on AM and FM radio stations across the United States and parts of Canada. For The State of Us, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our associate recording producer, Levi LaForge, and senior editing producer, Bradley Butch. Thank you all, of course, to our audience for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.